when I came in as part of the 2010 budget, my challenge to the legislature was to try and get them to think flat. Don't go out and raise rates on businesses. Don't try and think that the economy's going to turn around. We had a number of meetings where we tried to convince them that we were in a 1970s type of scenario, and that if they accepted that premise, that they should be trying to keep the base. Well, we don't expect the base of the state's taxes to grow at all. There will be expectations of income from these enhancements, if you will, or expansions of coverage to the tax, and in the case of tobacco and meals and rooms, the ratings. December and January are going to be extremely telling months for the state of Hampshire. A lot of what will determine whether the enhancements and other and base performance are going to be predicated on how we end up as a country at the end of the fiscal year. What we're seeing is correlations between our revenues and the stock market, correlations between our business taxes and businesses generally. We're seeing that businesses overall are reluctant to invest, primarily because of federal initiatives regarding healthcare, environmental actions, and that's keeping a lot of businesses on the sidelines. So to the extent that those are resolved in the future, that is going to have an effect on, I think, the business attitude and the recovery going forward. So we're anxiously watching December and January. If for some reason we see that revenues are not performing, or that we see something that is happening on the national level that we think is not going to be producing the results locally that we expect, we'll be going back to the legislature, to the governor, and saying that we think that corrections.
Going into the next budget, we start $620 million in the hole. If somehow they fix the $300 million we talked about on the last page, if something really wonderful happens and we're okay in the current budget, it just means that the problem next year is only $625 million. And obviously these are estimates and there are things they can do, and if the recession ends really fast, which it doesn't really look to me like it's ending really fast, but you never know, that will help out a little bit. But this is a big problem. You can't grow your way out of a problem like this. 3% revenue growth, gets you another 40 million, not 600 million. So it's a nightmare. This is a much larger problem than New Hampshire has ever had. We have a budget crisis every 2 years, but this is, a friend of mine said to me, so what do you think they can do to fix it? And I said, nothing. I have no earthly clue. In the state budget, they passed this language: the commissioner shall identify additional revenues. Identify additional revenues, enhancements one might call them, that can be realized from the modification to the applicability of existing state taxes. They want to change taxes to identify additional revenues. Now that may, in some circles, not count as a tax increase. But where I come from, it does count as a tax increase. But the thing is that they're short, and they know they're short. And they want to identify additional revenues. And it is the commissioner's job to go forward. At the very end of the budget process, not during the normal hearing process, but at the very end of the budget process, the Department of Revenue Administration presented a 12-page memo to the Committee of Conference. Not that they want to have hearings on additional revenue sources, but that he's got, I think it's 11 or 12 ideas that he thought could raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Now they ended up adopting the one, which is the so-called LLC tax. They ended up not adopting, although they talked about adopting, a refinancing tax. Because, if we just wait for people to sell their house, we can't get enough money out of them. So if you refinance, God forbid you should refinance your house, we should tax you on that too. I put this up to say that they need money, and you're a giant dead wildebeest carcass on the side of the road, and they're looking to feed off of you.
If I can do one thing, it's to introduce into this conversation some nuance and a concept of uncertainty. It struck me when we went through this during the last budget session that the reason we ended up making what Charlie and others have argued is bad last-minute decisions is because it gets wrapped up in political rhetoric. And that for New Hampshire's future, we should be starting to have conversations about spending and revenue structures now, not in the final 30 days of the budget development process in 2011. And this is entirely a function of understanding that the legislature, the governor, and the state citizens have the ability to influence this budget process beginning now. We spend about a little less than 20% on personnel and benefits. We spend another 10% on debt service and administrative expenses. Most of the money that we spend in the state goes out to the communities in some fashion or another, whether it's the hospitals, the physicians, through the Medicaid program, or through local aid to schools in the form of the Meals and Rooms distribution, or in education. So if you really want to control spending, you got to have the political will to go where the spending is. And that's education adequacy, school building aid, local aid, Medicaid program, correction system, retirement system, etc. This is not easy work. This requires real political will. These are sacred cows in the political process. And there are ways that the state can control its spending, but they require engaging people that don't want change to happen. How big a hole in 2012? Well, as I said, it depends. I'm not going to read much about what it says, but there are 3 high-risk spending areas, which I think everyone in the state is going to be having a conversation about. One is education expenditures. There's $123 million in adequacy payments that are currently being paid by federal dollars that are going to come onto the state books. There's $80 million in school building aid, which was bonded, which I don't think they're going to bond anymore, and they have not shown the political will to eliminate as a program. And there's another $33 million resulting from changing something called the collar, which protected the state from real increases in expenditures associated with the new adequacy program. Based on the drop in the market and the fact that rates for the retirement system are set now, the state can expect a 25% increase in the requirements for the general fund. And what does that mean? They're going to shift responsibility back to local communities as they did in the last budgetary, or at least that's the